In the waning days of August 1945, as the world reeled from the shock of atomic devastation, a different kind of bargain was being forged in a quiet hotel suite on the outskirts of Tokyo. Representatives of the United States Office of Strategic Services, later to become the Central Intelligence Agency, had traveled across the ruins of Japan with a single purpose: to secure the scientific knowledge that lay hidden within the walls of Unit 731, the covert biological warfare laboratory that had operated out of Harbin since 1936. The Japanese commanders who headed the program understood the precariousness of their position. Their experiments, plague, anthrax, cholera, and a litany of other pathogens unleashed upon prisoners of war and civilian populations, were undeniable evidence of crimes against humanity. Yet they also possessed data that could alter the balance of power in an emerging Cold War. In a series of clandestine meetings, U.S. officials offered a stark choice: immunity from prosecution in exchange for unrestricted access to the laboratory's records, field notes, and surviving specimens. The agreement was sealed without fanfare, recorded only in memoranda that would later be classified under the highest level of secrecy. For the United States, the promise of a head start in biological research outweighed any moral calculus. For the Japanese officers, it meant survival, both personal and institutional, and the possibility of continuing their scientific pursuits under a new patronage. In the weeks that followed, American intelligence teams arrived in Harbin, escorted by Japanese soldiers who had once guarded the perimeter of Unit 731's compound. They catalogued thousands of documents, detailed protocols on pathogen cultivation, field reports describing the outcomes of plague bomb tests over Chinese cities, and grim autopsy logs of prisoners subjected to vivisection without anesthesia. Rather than releasing these records to the Allied war crimes tribunals in Tokyo, U.S. officials classified them as national security material. The rationale was simple: the data could be weaponized, and its disclosure would expose the United States' own involvement in subsequent biowarfare research. Consequently, the Allies were denied a full accounting of the atrocities committed by Unit 731, and Japanese defendants escaped the legal scrutiny that their counterparts faced at Nuremberg. The secrecy extended beyond paperwork. Photographs, film reels, and even physical samples of pathogens were shipped to American laboratories under cover stories of medical research. The United Nations' early attempts to investigate war crimes found themselves repeatedly stonewalled by redacted files and diplomatic refusals. In the public sphere, the narrative of Japan's surrender remained focused on conventional military defeat, while the hidden horror of biological experimentation faded into a footnote that would not be fully written for decades. By 1947, many of the scientists who had once overseen lethal experiments in Harbin resurfaced in civilian life. Leveraging the immunity granted by the United States, they secured positions at prestigious Japanese universities and research institutes. Their expertise in microbiology, epidemiology, and immunology, honed through years of clandestine work, made them valuable assets in a nation desperate to rebuild its scientific infrastructure. In lecture halls across Tokyo and Osaka, former Unit 731 technicians taught the next generation of physicians and researchers. They authored textbooks that omitted any reference to their wartime activities, instead presenting their findings as breakthroughs in disease control. Their influence subtly steered Japanese biomedical research toward fields such as vaccine development and antibiotic production, areas that would later become pillars of post-war public health. Yet beneath the veneer of academic respectability lay an uneasy continuity. The same methodologies that had once been employed on unwilling human subjects now informed laboratory practices, albeit under the guise of ethical oversight. The lack of transparent accountability allowed these individuals to shape scientific discourse without confronting the moral debt owed to their victims. Across the Pacific, the United States integrated the harvested data into its own biological warfare program, code-named Operation Whitecoat. Researchers at Fort Detrick and other classified sites dissected Unit 731's pathogen strains, replicating plague vectors and refining aerosol dispersal techniques. The intelligence community believed that possessing such capabilities would serve as a deterrent against Soviet expansionism, positioning bioweapons as a strategic complement to the burgeoning nuclear arsenal. The ethical paradox was stark. America, having championed democratic ideals, now stood on the precipice of deploying weapons whose development had been rooted in human suffering. The secrecy surrounding these programs meant that congressional oversight remained minimal and public awareness virtually non-existent. As the Cold War intensified, so did the clandestine exchange of biological data among allied nations. Joint exercises simulated outbreak scenarios, and contingency plans were drafted for potential retaliation involving engineered pathogens. The legacy of Unit 731's research thus seeped into global security doctrines, influencing policies that would persist long after the original scientists had retired. It was not until the early 1970s that cracks began to appear in the veil of secrecy. A handful of Japanese journalists, motivated by a growing appetite for investigative reporting, managed to obtain declassified U.S. memos through Freedom of Information Act requests. These documents revealed the existence of the immunity agreement and detailed the transfer of research materials from Harbin to American labs. The revelations sparked limited public debate within Japan. Newspapers ran cautious articles that hinted at governmental complicity, but stopped short of naming individuals, fearing legal repercussions. Academic circles debated the ethical implications of employing former Unit 731 researchers, yet many scholars defended their colleagues by emphasizing scientific merit over moral accountability. Internationally, human rights organizations cited the newly uncovered memos as evidence of a broader pattern of post-war impunity for Axis war criminals. Nonetheless, the discourse remained fragmented, hampered by the lingering classification of core documents and the reluctance of governments to revisit uncomfortable chapters of their histories. In 1995, the International Truth Commission, a non-governmental coalition dedicated to documenting wartime atrocities, launched a concerted effort to locate survivors of Unit 731's experiments. Through painstaking fieldwork in China and former occupied territories, the Commission recorded testimonies from families who had lost loved ones to plague bombs, anthrax inhalation, and forced vivisections. These oral histories painted a stark portrait of systematic cruelty. Prisoners bound to tables, subjected to lethal injections, their organs examined while they remained conscious, entire villages sealed off as test sites for airborne pathogens that decimated civilian populations. The Commission compiled the accounts into a comprehensive report demanding official acknowledgement from both Japan and the United States, as well as reparations for the descendants of victims. The demand resonated in diplomatic corridors. While Japan's government continued to deny legal responsibility, citing the 1951 San Francisco Peace Treaty as a settlement of all wartime claims, the International Truth Commission leveraged public opinion to press for moral recognition. The United States, faced with renewed scrutiny over its own biowarfare program, issued statements expressing deep regret for any suffering caused by the use of data obtained from Unit 731, though it stopped short of admitting culpability. The growing pressure culminated in a parliamentary inquiry held in Tokyo in 2000. Lawmakers, many of whom had never heard of Unit 731 before the hearings, examined the archival evidence presented by historians and survivor advocates. Debates centered on the legality of the immunity deal, its compatibility with international humanitarian law, and the moral responsibility of a nation that allowed perpetrators to reintegrate without accountability. After weeks of testimony, the Diet passed a symbolic resolution, acknowledging the suffering endured by countless victims of wartime atrocities and expressing an official apology for Japan's role in biological warfare. The resolution was deliberately worded to avoid any admission of legal liability or reparations, reflecting the political constraints imposed by domestic revisionist factions that continued to downplay the extent of Unit 731's crimes. Nevertheless, the act represented a modest shift in public discourse. Teachers began incorporating discussions of Unit 731 into curricula, museums dedicated exhibitions to the hidden history, and scholars published peer-reviewed studies analyzing the program's scientific legacy alongside its ethical violations. The acknowledgement, though limited, signaled an incremental move toward confronting a suppressed chapter of the past. Today, the story of Unit 731 endures not as a sensational legend, but as a cautionary testament to how secrecy can reshape history. Documentary series produced by independent filmmakers have pieced together archival footage, grainy images of Harbin's laboratory compounds, declassified charts of pathogen spread, and interviews with surviving witnesses to construct a narrative that bridges the gap between hidden archives and public consciousness. The impact of those wartime experiments reverberates in contemporary debates over biotechnological ethics, dual-use research, and the governance of emerging pathogens. The data harvested by the United States contributed to early vaccine development, but also laid groundwork for offensive capabilities that modern nations continue to grapple with under international treaties. In reflecting on this tangled legacy, one is reminded that the true cost of immunity deals extends beyond legal documents. It resides in the lives altered irrevocably by clandestine science and the collective memory that societies choose to preserve or erase. The shadows cast by Unit 731 linger in policy rooms, classrooms, and the quiet resolve of those who still seek truth. As we close this chapter, the lesson remains clear. Transparency and accountability are not merely moral imperatives. They are essential safeguards against the recurrence of hidden accords that trade human suffering for strategic advantage. Only by confronting these shadows can we hope to illuminate a future where science serves humanity rather than exploiting its darkest impulses.